All right, let's dive into something pretty cool today. Ubuntu Pedagogy. And specifically, we're looking at Alicia Blackwood's book, Ubuntu Pedagogy, Becoming an Ubuntu Responsive Educator. I think we're all kind of searching for a more human-centered way to approach teaching, right?
Absolutely. And I think you're going to be really interested to see how this concept of Ubuntu kind of plugs right into that.
All right, so let's get into it. The book starts with her own experience teaching her first year in an urban district right after 9/11. That must have been intense.
Yeah, it was. She really doesn't hold back about the challenges she faced, talk about a trial by fire. But what's really key is how she reflected on all of that and what she took away from those tough experiences.
So is that what led her to Ubuntu? I mean, what exactly did those early experiences teach her?
Well, she realized that the traditional methods of teaching, very individualistic, weren't really working, especially in such a demanding environment. Like she needed something more, something different. And she found that in Ubuntu, a way to build a learning environment based on support and connection.
That makes a lot of sense. So how did those experiences shape her understanding of Ubuntu's core principles? Because the book highlights 6, right?
Yeah. And they all tie together in this really cool way. But Blackwood really emphasizes that everything starts with understanding yourself.
At first, that sounds pretty basic. Like, yeah, of course. But in the context of Ubuntu, what does that actually look like?
Right. It's more than just a surface level thing. It's about educators really digging deep, examining their values, their biases, and their experiences. Because all of that self-awareness, that's what lays the groundwork for building genuine, authentic relationships with students.
So it's not just about, like, being nice to your students. It's about this deeper level of introspection, right?
Exactly. And that introspection is what takes an educator from just being culturally competent to being truly Ubuntu competent.
Okay, now I'm even more curious.
Yeah.
What's the difference there? I mean, between cultural competence and Ubuntu competence.
Sure. So cultural competence is about understanding and respecting different cultures, which is important, definitely. But Ubuntu competence goes a bit deeper. It's about recognizing our shared humanity, that connection that goes beyond cultural background. It's about seeing ourselves in others and approaching teaching with a huge dose of empathy and compassion.
That is powerful. I like that. So how do you take this idea of Ubuntu competence and make it a reality in the classroom? How does that play out?
Well, that's where the other 5 principles really come to life. You see, understanding oneself, it naturally leads to building those positive relationships with students. And from there, it's all about fostering a sense of unity in the classroom.
Not uniformity, though.
Right,
Yeah.
you got it.
Yeah.
It's not about everyone being the same, but rather understanding that we're all in this together. And that's where embracing diversity comes into play.
So it's about celebrating the differences, but also seeing that shared humanity, right?
Right. Bingo. And underpinning all of this are the final 2 principles, using evidence-based practices and understanding the holistic child. They're not just buzzwords, they actually push educators to use research and data to make those teaching decisions, and to see each student as a whole person, not just academically, but emotionally and socially too.
It's about finding that sweet spot, right?
Right.
Where you have deep understanding of each student's needs and you're backing it up with approaches that actually work. That's where the magic happens, I guess. Does the book have specific examples of what this looks like in action?
Oh yeah, tons. Blackwood brings in all these great anecdotes from her own experience and from other educators around the world. For example, there's this one story.
Actually, before we get into a specific story, I want to hear more about this global perspective, because the book takes us to Botswana and Namibia, right?
Oh, absolutely. Blackwood doesn't just talk the talk. She goes out and sees Ubuntu in action firsthand in both rural and inner city schools. She sees how ingrained it is in these communities and how it shapes their approach to education.
Wow. And what were some of her main takeaways from those experiences? What really stood out to her about how Ubuntu is practiced in those cultures?
One thing that really stood out was just the emphasis on community and support. It wasn't just about the teacher and the student. It was about everyone coming together, like the whole village,
Yeah.
creating this nurturing environment where everybody has the chance to thrive.
That's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
I can imagine, though, that there are some cultural differences that might make it hard to take what she saw and just directly apply it to a U.S. classroom, right?
Oh, yeah. Definitely Blackwood's not pretending it's a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. She
Yeah.
talks about those nuances and the need to adapt the Ubuntu principles to different situations. But what she also points out is that there are these universal human values at the heart of Ubuntu, like respect and empathy and interconnectedness. These things go beyond culture.
Yeah, that's really reassuring to hear. So let's get down to brass tacks. How does this actually play out in a real U.S. classroom? I'm especially interested in the whole discipline thing, because traditional methods don't always work, do they?
Right, and that's where Ubuntu offers a really interesting alternative. It's about shifting away from punishment, and moving towards restorative practices. So instead of just punishing a student for misbehaving, it's about figuring out what caused that behavior and helping them learn from it.
So it's not about letting kids get away with stuff. It's about holding them accountable, but in a way that helps them grow and understand.
Yeah, exactly. It's about guiding them to make things right and rebuild those relationships, teaching them how to be responsible members of their community.
Makes a lot of sense. I can see how that would create a more positive, more supportive classroom environment.
Mm.
But what about the teachers themselves? How does this whole Ubuntu approach influence their role, their identity even?
Oh, that's another fascinating piece. Blackwood really emphasizes how important it is for teachers to have self-awareness and to be authentic. Ubuntu encourages them to actually write down their teaching philosophy based on their values and
Like
beliefs.
teaching is more than just a job, right? It's like a way of being.
Yeah, exactly. And that authenticity, it allows teachers to connect with students on a much deeper level.
I really like how the book talks about using proverbs and aphorisms and even adinkra symbols. It seems like such a cool way to bring those Ubuntu values to life.
They really are. It's like tapping into this ancient wisdom and using it to have conversations about ethics and character and making good choices.
Can you give us an example of how a teacher might use those in a classroom?
Sure, imagine a classroom where there's a conflict, right? The teacher could bring up an African proverb, something like, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, to get the students thinking about collaboration and community.
That's great. It's not just about telling students what's right or wrong, but giving them the tools to figure it out themselves.
Right. And the Adinkra symbols, with those visual images, they can create a shared language. Everyone understands what they mean. Each symbol represents a different Ubuntu concept, like unity or strength or perseverance.
It's about making those abstract values, making them real, something they can grasp.
Exactly. And that leads us to another important point that Blackwood makes, the connection between Ubuntu pedagogy and this growing movement towards social emotional learning, SEL.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. I can definitely see the parallels. SEL focuses on developing those skills,
Yeah.
self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy, making good decisions. All those things are part of Ubuntu, aren't they?
Absolutely. Ubuntu gives SEL a foundation. It's rooted in culture and history. It's not just some new fad. It's built on centuries of wisdom and tradition.
That's really powerful. So Ubuntu started in Africa, but those principles, they can apply anywhere, right? It's a global thing. It's about being human.
Exactly, and that's what makes it so exciting. In a world that feels divided so much of the time, Ubuntu reminds us that we're all connected, we're all human. We do better when we support each other.
It's a message of hope. And speaking of hope, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how Ubuntu can help address some of the really big challenges facing education today,
Yeah.
especially in the US, like achievement gaps, inequity, and the lack of culturally responsive teaching. Can Ubuntu really make a difference in those areas?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I don't think Ubuntu is some kind of magical solution. But I do think it gives us a really powerful way to start tackling those issues. Because remember, at its heart, Ubuntu is about recognizing our shared humanity. That means creating learning environments where every student feels seen and heard and supported, no matter their background.
So it's about going beyond just saying we value diversity and actually creating a system where every student has a real chance to succeed.
Exactly. It means looking at the things that create those inequalities. And Ubuntu pushes us to ask those hard questions like, are our teaching methods really culturally responsive? Are we meeting the social and emotional needs of all our students? Are we creating a sense of belonging in our classrooms?
It's about more than just changing the curriculum. It's about looking at the deeper stuff, the things that shape a student's experience.
You got it. And that's where that emphasis on self-awareness and understanding the whole child, that's where that becomes so important. It's about teachers understanding their own biases and how those biases might be affecting their students. It's about seeing each student as a whole person with their own unique needs and experiences.
It sounds like Ubuntu is asking for a real change in mindset, not just for individual teachers, but for the whole education system.
Absolutely. It's a challenge for sure, but it's also a huge opportunity.
Mhm.
Blackwood's book is like a call to action. It's calling on educators to be the change, to create learning environments that are truly equitable and inclusive, inspired by Ubuntu.
That's pretty inspiring.
Yeah.
So for our listeners who've been with us on this deep dive, what's the one thing you want them to remember about Ubuntu pedagogy?
Hmm. The most important thing to remember is that Ubuntu is more than just a bunch of teaching strategies. It's a way of life, a way of relating to ourselves, to other people, to our community. It's about being empathetic, being compassionate, and understanding that we're all connected.
It's about recognizing that everyone has something to offer and that we're all in this together.
Right, exactly. And that's such an important message, especially now.
Well said. I think we've covered a lot today. We've talked about where Ubuntu came from, the key principles behind it, how it looks in the classroom, and how it can change education as we know it. It's been quite a journey.
It has, and it's really just the beginning. There's still so much to learn about Ubuntu and its potential to create a better world, a fairer world.
Absolutely. So to our listeners, keep exploring. Dig into Blackwood's book, find other resources, connect with educators who are putting Ubuntu into practice.
Yeah, and maybe most importantly, think about how you can bring those Ubuntu values into your own life and work, whether you're a teacher, a parent, or just someone who wants to make the world a little bit better.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for being with us on this deep dive into Ubuntu pedagogy. We hope you learned something new and maybe even feel inspired. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep that Ubuntu spirit alive.